Hey everyone, Matt here from Doctor Running, and today we're going to do a little extended review and analysis of the Adidas Prime X Strung 2. So, Prime X Strung 1 was definitely an interesting shoe with the Prime X. It was crazy stack height, 50 millimeters in the heel, really unstable, kind of terrifying to run in, but still amazing that they could make a shoe this tall and have such a fairly lightweight. My size 10 was 9.8 ounces, is 9.8 ounces. The specs for that back in the day was 8.7 ounces is what I saw one source. This is before Adidas was sending us a lot of stuff, so I had to kind of find my own stuff. It was just a crazy shoe, and it worked really well for some people. Some people really enjoyed this shoe. There's a lot of people that race in it. It was basically a higher stack height Adios Pro 2 that just had that same bounce, and it was really interesting, but just not stable. The Prime X Strung, I've been fascinated by since I saw photos of it, and I was super excited. I was super excited to find out when Adidas was sending us a few pairs of these, and I'm very thankful for that and do appreciate and do notice. Again, these were sent to us for review without any kind of compensation. We send out all our own thoughts as always and do not prep people for what we're going to say, and that definitely goes for this video. So what I want to talk about today is how this shoe is different and some of the really interesting mechanisms of stability and biomechanics, but also things that I don't understand, right? I'm going to talk about some gaps from going, hey, this is really cool. I don't know how this works. These are questions I have that maybe some of you as engineers, as biomech, somebody might have the answer. I'm really curious. Please put it in the chat or the comment section because I'm curious. I'm trying to learn along with you. So let's talk about this. I have 30 miles on my pair right now. I'm going to try to get to 100 miles to get a full review on this stuff. And we'll hopefully have a written review out really soon, if not already by the time this video comes out. But spec-wise, again, it's a different shoe. The Strung 2 and the Strung 1 are not the same shoe. They are different in so many ways, not just spec-wise, but also how they feel, how they run. And that's really what I want to get across to you is not only those of you that are running in the shoe, so this is a little comparison review, running in the original Prime X Strung, but also those that are just interested in the shoe to kind of go, hey, what is this? Is it safe? Is it something I can run in, and who might it work for? So I want to talk about that because it is working really well for me. And this one was terrifying and didn't work as well. So I just want to dive into what's going on here, especially from a stability standpoint, because that's one of the things that we at Dr. Runners tend to talk about a little bit more than other reviewers. So if you want like the nitty-gritty, like all the kind of stuff that you typically get from a review site, this may not be really heavy on that. It's going to be more heavy on some kind of geeky stuff. So I appreciate if you just hang out for this. This is just my thoughts. So this is a super trainer is the best way I can describe this. Spec-wise, Adidas has this shoe at 10.4 ounces for men's size. I think it's 9. I think 9.9 ounces for women's size 8. There is 50 millimeters in the heel, 43.5 in the forefoot for a 6.5 millimeter drop. So very similar to what the Adios Pro moved into, Adios Pro 3 moved into. Very kind of similar, like outsole, like the same kind of outsole setup. It is meant, like I said, they kind of call it like a distance super racer, a legal racer again, because the stack height goes above what's legal for World Athletics Association. For those of us who are not professional athletes, it's going to be fine. From what I understand, people were running triathlons, and somebody ran a 2:30 in this, which actually doesn't surprise me, and I'll talk about why in just a second. But the whole shoe is totally different. It is an insanely tall stack height shoe that is surprisingly stable, which I am still wrapping my head around. That's what I want to talk about. But it's a super trainer. It's insanely tall off the ground, but it doesn't have the same crazy feel as some of the other super shoes, at least initially to me, like the instability of the previous one. So let's dive in. I'm going to do the same way I do reviews. Let's talk about the fit first, kind of some of the not as exciting stuff. We'll talk about ride. We'll talk about biomechanics and stability last, because that's where we're going to get the meat and potatoes, which I really want to talk about. So fit-wise, this one actually fits true to size. The previous two kind of fit slightly long for me. This one fits really true to size. The Strung upper is more flexible than previous. There is not a separate tongue. It's now integrated, and I do need to make sure that this flips up, because when I put it on, it does tend to flip down. It's really hard to get on. If you have a normal to high volume foot, this is hard to get on. Once you get it on, it's like a sock. It's softer. Do not wear this sockless. I tried that. The Strung material is pretty scratchy, so make sure you wear at least thin socks or normal width socks. There's no heel counters, so that works super well for someone like myself that's got a sensitive heel, but it sits really low against the foot, and honestly, when I put it on, I'm like, this is kind of tight. I don't know what to think about this. And then you run, it's like a sock, and you forget about it. I did get a little heel slippage here, so I did have to lace lock this, which fortunately worked perfect, right? Kind of the first time I have to lace lock a shoe, and thank goodness Adidas added some additional laces back here. So that really fixed the fit. I haven't had any major slippage. I wouldn't try to take a turn really quick in this, but it's way better than the previous version. So fit, true to size, finally, flexible upper that does lock you down if you lock yourself down. So yeah, nothing too crazy about that other than having a really sock-like upper and no separate tongue. The midsole is where things get more interesting. So the previous version, the midsole was super bouncy and not soft, but really bouncy, like the Adidas Pro 2. This version, it's not as bouncy unless you're running faster or putting a lot more force to the ground. When I'm just running in this and normally I was like, this kind of feels almost like a normal sole, like almost like the Boston, but just taller and broader and more stable. And I was like, that's really interesting. So I've taken it on several easy runs, a long run, which is a little bit up tempo, and a longer threshold / tempo effort. And I really was starting that threshold effort going, this is not going to go that well. I'll stay around 650 pace, which is where I am right now. I'm getting back into shape. And it started to cut down. I was doing this on a hilly course, and all of a sudden I was running like 620s, which was my tempo pace. And I'm like, I'm running 620s in a 11.5 ounce shoe, which by the way, is how much my size 10 weighs. So 11.5 ounces. And I'm like, that's interesting. And it actually felt pretty decent. So easy runs, up tempo runs, and then like marathon pace runs actually feel really good in this shoe. It doesn't feel as unnatural as something like the original Prime X Strung, because this is light enough where it's like, whoa, like this should not feel this bouncy and this light, but it does. This one felt more grounded, is probably not the right word, but it just feels kind of more relatively natural because it's not as bouncy. But when you start putting force on the ground, if you have this much Light Strike Pro, you're gonna get some bounce, and it actually feels pretty good. Super smooth ride. Again, for me, this is very similar to the Adidas Pro 2, and the bevel works really, really well. I'll talk stability there. And then it doesn't feel as stiff through the forefoot. So there's now 2 carbon fiber rods plates, instead of the rods and plates that you saw in the previous versions. It just feels a little more natural, and it's got a little wider base. So it rolls much nicer for me. And I think that's also because this, to me, fits a little more true to size than the other ones, which this feels slightly long. So it feels like kind of like hitting the end of the shoe. So that's why it felt a lot smoother to me. Nathan mentioned it felt super stiff to him. So I'm super curious to get his review on this stuff. But from a ride perspective, yeah, it's a super tall shoe that can get into kind of longer workout paces. It's a phenomenal long run shoe for sure. It can handle some easy paces, but it doesn't feel as crazy unless you're like me, who wore 0 shoes all day while teaching and then went and ran in this, and I was like, whoa, that was a little weird. But outside of that, easy paces don't feel crazy like a lot of super shoes do. And I think that's partially because of the weight and maybe a couple other things, but yeah, it just feels good. So if you want a long run shoe that can handle up-tempo work, if you want just a super tall shoe that can handle a little faster efforts, this is going to be a solid choice. You just have to know it's $300. It's very expensive. It's been durable. I did 30 miles nowhere at all. So I will take this as far as it will go. As far as the Super Blast did, which I have 200 miles on that one, and I still haven't worn through the outsole. So definitely worth the money on that one. But we'll have to see with this. The other thing I want to talk about is combination of ride and stability. This shoe is so different from the Prime X Strung 1 because this, you see how narrow the sole is, especially the midfoot. It was like I had to feel like I had to work so hard at anything but up-tempo paces because of how it felt unstable and wobbly. This doesn't feel wobbly at all. Super wide base, even through the midfoot. The forefoot is super wide here. The other components that I haven't seen mentioned at all, but I can definitely feel. So, like the Adidas Pro 2, this lateral bevel is so intense, it almost creates a wedge. So this is flat. If you land back here, the midsole is cut. So for those who need medial stability, this actually might work really well for you, which is why I was like, why the heck is this working so well for mechanics? I need some stability medially. It works well. If you have some lateral stability issues, this might not work as well because you're at the heel, because you're getting pushed this direction. So for me, it works really well. For others, lateral stability might not work well. So people that really like the Adidas Pro 2 and the heel, this might work really well. It is way more stable though than that shoe. Once I got to the midfoot, again, it didn't bother me, and there is pretty solid. And this Pro foam feels a little stiffer than the last version, at least here, and I'll talk about that in a second. The sidewalls actually work really well, and they kind of go mildly from the heel to the midfoot. So plus the wedge feeling, it's actually got some medial stability. And the final piece about this is there's this extra bit of material here that's not on the lateral side that further raises the medial side. So if you kind of need a little medial wedge, this surprisingly might work really, really well for you. And that's something I was very surprised about. So just know if you have lateral stability issues, this might not be the best option for you until you get to the forefoot. If you need that in the heel, this actually is going to work really well. So like a borderline stability shoe, based on how this is being set up, even with the tall stack height. So just be aware of that. You know, you've also got it's very, very stiff. Nathan was right. It is a really stiff shoe, especially the midfoot. So if you need that, it's going to make it really stable. This didn't work as well, at least for me, because the stiffness and the platform was so narrow, it couldn't compensate for that. This being the platform being so wide actually works really, really well. So I'm very impressed. And it's going to work again really well for those that need medial stuff, not maybe so good for lateral. And that actually continues into the forefoot, where I was looking at this going, wow, this feels really great to toe off from. Like, it almost feels too good for me because I also need a little forefoot stability on the medial side. And I was like, So as I was looking at this, again, very different shoes between the two of these, where you don't have a lot of sole flare in the Prime X1. In the Prime X2, you got a lot going on to the medial side. And I might be crazy, but it almost looks like the forefoot rocker actually goes a little bit lateral and not as much medial. So when I'm trying to roll this on the ground, it's much easier to go off lateral as I toe off through this, like as I'm just like playing with it on the ground, as it is to go medial. So I kind of suspect there's a little bit more built up on the medial side, at least from a guidance perspective, you're getting guided a little laterally. So if you have trouble going too far this way, this might be a little problem. If you need a little bit of subtle forefoot stability just from a little guided, like little more material on the medial side, this is actually going to work really well. So I did not expect this. I was expecting to go, this is going to be a cool shoe. I'm glad Adidas is sending this to us, but I'm probably going to die wearing this. And then I've worn it and I'm like, holy moly, this actually feels really good as somebody who needs a little medial stability. And again, a warning for those that don't need that, this might be an issue. So for those of us that need stability or have neutral mechanics, maybe it's going to be good. Those go too lateral. We'll have to see. So that's what was most surprising. You've got, just to summarize, what feels like that medial, like the lateral wedge here, or medial wedge, where it's pushed up. You got the extra material here from this little band, that you're sitting, again, in this position where the foot's inverted. The heel is inverted a little bit. If you land there, even at the forefoot, you're kind of getting a little bit more lateral guidance through there. So again, a lot of surprising medial stability, not aggressive in a post kind of way, adding the stiffness, but it works really well. So if that's especially something that you tend to fatigue with, which I again notice on long runs, I'm like, why am I not feeling as bad? I haven't done many long runs, and getting up into that mileage, I'm like, I'm feeling good. Why is this? So just super different and super interesting to me about how this is going. The last thing I'm really interested in is the fact that there are three foams, three versions of Light Strike Pro here. And they didn't do a great job of talking about this. They just kind of subtly mentioned this. But 3 layers, and here you got the top layer is your classic Adios Pro, or your, not Adios Pro, your Light Strike Pro here. The bottom layer is pretty classic Light Strike Pro. But then you have this middle layer that they didn't talk about that is super soft. And there's apparently another wedge of it in the heel, and centrally in the heel as well, which also might be, again, when you have, even with Light Strike Pro, if you have a softer midsole in the center with firmer foam around it, that's actually really great guidance-wise because you're going to sink in rather than going lateral medial. So another piece there. This is very soft. And I'm really curious about this density of Lightstrike Pro and if we're going to see this more in other shoes, because it's totally different. It's the softest variation that I have felt of any of these, and it actually feels really good to land farther forward because you get just a little bit more bounce off the forefoot than the heel. Maybe it's just the amount of foam that you get a little less of this in the heel compared to up front. But it's so soft. And I asked Saucony about this. I remember having a conversation, but I'm super curious biomechanically and engineering wise, how 3 foams of different densities interact when you land, right? How does the shoe interact? And then how does your body interact with that? Because I'm trying to go, well, we know a lot of the super shoes out there have 2 densities of foams, like a top layer and a bottom layer. It's the same material, just different densities. And, you know, a single layer of that versus 2 layers, I'm really curious because I don't know the answer. But the inner part, like having a centralized super soft between 2 slightly firmer, this is not firm, by the way, but 2 slightly firmer versions, I'm just curious how your body reacts to that. So I don't know. But it's a really solid shoe, but it's different. In summary of this is no longer the super racing shoe that, or the crazy super illegal racing shoe that this was. I don't think anybody's going to be running a 209, like what was it? 209, 211 in this, like they were in this. But I think a lot of people are going to be having some excellent long runs, and it's more of a training shoe now than it is racing. It can handle workouts. Like I said, marathon efforts, longer up-tempo efforts are phenomenal in this shoe. But it's now more versatile into the slower efforts where it feels comfortable doing easy runs. This did not feel good doing easy runs. This one did. I don't even know why they call this the Prime X Strung 2. They probably should have called this a different shoe outside of the Strung upper, because at least I could not, other than some of the specs, they couldn't be more different. It does make it more usable for someone like me, but you're gonna lose some of that faster bounce that the original versions had. So if you like that, great. If you didn't like that and you're like disappointed, it felt too unstable, like you're gonna die in it, and you got some cash, this might be an interesting option and has really reframed my mind on what, like, how abnormal some of these shoes can feel when they start getting these stack heights. So I got to give Adidas credit. They've made a lot of changes. There's a lot of things to this shoe that's going to really polarize people. Some people are going to, like me, are probably going to really love it. Other people are going to hate it because it's going to be so different and not have the same feel that the original 2 versions have. And if you don't like that, go find these on sale, right? It's $300 on sale. That's a great deal. And yeah, so I'm trying to figure out whether I want to comment on durability. I had 30 miles on this shoe and 30 miles on this one. The outsoles look great. I have heard some people rip off this small piece on these ones. I'm not worried about this. Like that, my Adios Pro 3 lasted really well for me, right? So I'm expecting to get a lot of miles, but I will get back to you on the durability of this. I'm going to keep training on it. I'm going to get 100 miles pretty quick, but I'm just really curious to see not only where they keep going, but how this shoe changes over time. So again, appreciate listening to me kind of ramble. I hope you maybe learn something. You're like, oh, maybe that's a shoe for me, or it's not a shoe for me based on some of the biases in the sole. But also please let me know what you think. What do you think happens when you have multiple densities of foams and you land, right? How do you think the shoe reacts to that in terms of biomechanically? How do you think your body might react to it? And obviously the answer is it depends on the person. But I'm just super curious to know what you think and what you think of this shoe. Are you excited for it? Are you terrified of it like I was originally? Are you interested in it? Is it something on your bucket list? Is it not? Again, it's $300. That's really expensive. But yeah, time will tell, like the Super Blast, if it's worth it. So I will get back to you on whether it's worth it or not and get tons of miles in this. Right now, that's my thoughts on the Adidas Prime X Strung 2. We will have a written review out that's going to be a little less all over the place like this one was, because I appreciate you just listening to my thoughts. But we'll get the full written review out, and we'll get some updates on it, and we'll get some reviews from Nathan and Andrea, who also have this. So stay tuned. You'll find us on all the social media sites as usual. Bach is a social media wizard that does a great job of getting information out there and adding his own. We really appreciate you listening as always. We hope this is helpful and hope you learned something, or at least made you think a little different.